Okay, so now we're going to be taking a look at graphing quadratics, not using a table of values, but how do you graph quadratics using X-Intercepts and the quadratics vertex? So that's what our focus is on today. So to find the X-Intercepts are also known as the zeros of a quadratic. So we want to talk about, okay, well, how do you find the zeros of a quadratic? Okay, notice here, this is a quadratic. If I did FOIL on this, the degree of this polynomial would be 2. Because the degree is 2, it is a quadratic. Now, anytime you have a quadratic, let's say it opens up like this one here, and it crosses the x-axis, where that quadratic crosses the x-axis, the y-coordinates of any quadratic that crosses the x-axis, or any relation at all that crosses the x-axis, we don't know what the x-coordinate is, that's what we want to find, but your y-coordinate will always be 0. You'll always be in a situation where that y-coordinate is 0. So because of that, if I'm looking to find my zeros, you set y equal to 0 and you solve for x. So by doing this here, we set y equal to 0 and I solve for x. Again, I have the product of two expressions. First expression is x minus 3, and the second expression is x minus 7. The only way the product of these two can be 0 is either the first one has to be 0 or the second one has to be 0. If both of them are not 0, there's no way the product can come out to be 0. So therefore, either x minus 3 is 0 or x minus 7 is 0, in which case x is 3 or x is 7. So the zeros for this expression are 3 and 7. Okay, let's do the same strategy for this one. Again, I want to find the zeros. If I'm finding the zeros, it has to be the case that y is 0. And again, the only way this product can be 0, either the x plus 4 is 0 or the x minus 1 is 0. Those are the only options. So either x plus 4 is 0 or x minus 1 is 0, i.e. either x is negative 4 or x is 1 for our zeros here. All right. Now, I'll leave it to you guys to do these three. Again, if you need the worksheet, just send a message in the comments. I can link a worksheet for whoever needs it. Let's move on though. Now that we've talked about how you find the zeros, the roots, the x-intercepts, how to use that to find the vertex, there is a connection. And here's the connection. Any quadratic you have, let me just graph a quadratic for us here. Right, we got ourselves a quadratic. This point right here, as we talked about, that's your vertex. It's typically labeled with an H and a K. Now let's assume it crosses the x-axis twice, and let's say we've got these two values here. These are my roots. We've just talked about how you actually find them. Now there's a special property that exists with these roots. The special property is that the roots are equidistant, or the same distance to the axis of symmetry. So what that means here is that, let's say my first root, I want to label my first root as x1. I'm going to label my second root as x2. Because they're equidistant to the axis of symmetry, the same distance, therefore, if I add them up and divide by 2, you'll actually get the middle value. You get the middle x value. Well, that middle x value will be the x coordinate of our vertex, which is typically labeled with an h. So in this case here, if I take my roots, add them up, and divide by 2, you'll get your h value. So now we have a way to find the h value. We'll talk shortly how you find the k value. But now let's take a look and try to do that to this quadratic. So same deal, I want to find the root. So I set the y equal to 0, I want to solve. Same idea. You have the product of two expressions is 0. Either the x plus 5 is 0 or the x minus 9 is 0. This minus 1 in front, and a lot of times people get confused by it, it doesn't contribute to the product being 0. If I change this minus 1 to a 2, a 3, a half, a root 2, or a pi, it's not going to change. What determines the product being 0 is either this has to be 0 or this has to be 0, because this will never be 0. So therefore x plus 5 is 0 or x minus 9 is 0. Therefore x equals negative 5 or x equals 9. Those are my two options. Now that I have my roots, my zeros, and my x-intercepts, I can find my h value. And to find my h value, we just talked about it, you add up your roots, which are negative 5 and 9, and you divide by 2. Well, negative 5 plus 9 is 4, divided by 2 is 2. So I now know the h value of my vertex. I know my vertex is 2, and then I need to find the k value. Well, to find the k value, or the y-coordinate of my vertex, the only thing I have to do is sub this into your quadratic. So here you have y equals negative 2 plus 5. Everywhere you see an x, you just change it to a 2. So y equals negative 7 times negative 7, and negative 7 times negative 7 is 49. So the vertex here is 49. So now we have a way to find the zeros and how to use the zeros to go ahead and find your vertex. So how you do it is you find your zeros, like we talked about, add them up, divide by 2, and you always have the x-coordinate of your vertex, sub that x-coordinate into your quadratic, and you'll get the corresponding y value. And now we have our vertex. Okay, let's try another one here. So same idea, I want to find the vertex. So before we find the vertex, I have to be able to find the roots. So you set y equal to 0. Either x plus 10 is 0 or x plus 2 is 0. So two possibilities. Set x plus 10 to 0, set x plus 2 to 0. So in this case, x is negative 10 or x is negative 2. Now I want to go ahead and find the vertex. So you find your h value. So you add up your roots and divide by 2, in which case I get negative 6. Now that I have my h value, I want to go ahead and sub that into your quadratic, right? I want to sub this into my quadratic so I can go ahead and find my k value, or the y coordinate of my vertex. So you're going to let x be negative 6. So everywhere I see an x, I change that to a negative 6. And you end up getting 4 times negative 4 is negative 16. Okay, so conclusion here, let's write this out. The vertex is going to be negative 6, negative 16. Okay, and again, you might have to rewatch the process, get out a piece of paper and kind of work through this with me a second time as I go through it. Might make a lot of sense to you, but that's a general process, right? You find your roots, which we did here, add them up, divide by, in this case here, add them up and divide by 2. That gives you the x-coordinate of your vertex, which is typically labeled with an h. Sub that into your quadratic, and then you have the corresponding k value or y-coordinate of your vertex. All right, I'll leave it to you to tackle B here. Now, how do you put this all together? Here's what the point of all this is. Now I have a quadratic, I can find its roots and I can find its vertex. We can use that to graph the quadratic. So let's go ahead and do it with this question here. So I want to go ahead and find the roots. So I'm going to set y equal to 0. And by setting y equal to 0, like we talked about, you set each of these equal to 0, in which case you get x is negative 6 or x is 2. So these become my two roots. Okay, now what I can do is I can find my h value for my vertex. So you're going to add up your roots and divide by 2. I end up getting negative 2 for my h value. To find my k value, or the y-coordinate of your vertex like we talked about, you sub it into your original equation. So in the place of x, I'm going to sub in a negative 2, sub in a negative 2, and I get y equals negative 4, negative 4, you get y is 16. So the vertex here is negative 2 and 16. So now we have our vertex. So looking at this here, what do I have? Well, I have my roots and I have my vertex. So I can now plot this. Well, my one root is at negative 6, so I'm going to plot that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. My second root is at 2, so it's going to be over here. And my vertex is at negative 2 and 16. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's plot that, you can follow along. So 2 over and then 16 up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Right there is my vertex. Okay, now that you have these three, you can actually connect this up and have a pretty decent estimate as to where what your quadratic looks like, right? Go up, and we go over, and we've got our quadratic here, and I can extend this line and we've got a quadratic drawn. Okay, here's my vertex. We just found the vertex. It is -2 and 16. Here's my x-intercept. The x-intercept, the first one is going to be 2 and 0, right? Remember your y-coordinate is always 0, and then the next point here is going to be -6 and 0. Okay, so going through this here, this is how you would use your roots and vertex to graph your quadratic. Okay, so I'd like you guys to go ahead and try out B. And then there's more practice here. We've got 1A to D you can practice, find the zeros. We move on to finding the vertex. And then there's 3 more to practice here on actually finding the roots, finding the zeros, and graphing your quadratic. All right, thank you.